Welcome to our channel where we dive into the darkest corners of reality, those places where the veil between our world and the next is thin and fragile. Tonight we bring you three spine-chilling tales of abandoned buildings that hide terrifying secrets, places where the echoes of past horrors linger in the shadows. Turn off the lights, sit back and prepare to be haunted. Our journey into the heart of fear begins in the cold, sterile halls of a forgotten hospital, a place where hope once lived and died. The building stands as a decaying monument to suffering, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the world. Locals tell tales of a malevolent presence that haunts the halls, the ghost of a doctor driven mad by grief. Imagine the heavy air, thick with the smell of disinfectant and decay, the silence, broken only by the creak of rusting gurneys. It's here, in this unsettling stillness, that a group of teenagers hungry for thrills decided to venture one night. They whispered stories of the doctor, a man who lost his mind and then his life within these walls, his spirit forever bound to the site of his torment. The teenagers crept through the abandoned hospital, their laughter echoing unnaturally in the silence. They wandered through vacant wards, their footsteps echoing on the linoleum floors, the only sound their own nervous breaths. They pushed open creaking doors, each room revealing more decay and desolation. They reached the operating room, a place where countless lives had been saved and lost. The air hung heavy here, thick with the spectral weight of past surgeries, the metallic scent of blood lingering long after the last patient had breathed their last. As they stood in the center of the room, a cold draft swept through the operating theater. The teenagers shivered, their laughter dying in their throats. One of them, a girl named Sarah, felt a chill run down her spine, a primal fear gripping her heart. Suddenly, the surgical lamp above them flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The teenagers froze, their eyes wide with terror. The air grew colder, and a low, guttural moan echoed through the room. Paralyzed by fear, they watched as instruments on a nearby tray began to rattle, as if an unseen hand were toying with them. The moan grew louder, morphing into a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah stumbled back, her eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the terrifying sound. Her foot caught on something on the floor and she fell, her hand landing on something cold and metallic. She looked down and saw with a gasp of horror a rusted scalpel lying in her hand. The scream reached a deafening crescendo, and then as quickly as it began, everything went silent. The surgical lamp flickered once and died, plunging the room back into darkness. Our next tale of terror takes us to the hallowed halls of an abandoned school, a place where the laughter of children has been replaced by an unsettling silence. The building, once a beacon of knowledge, now stands as a grim reminder of a dark past. Locals whisper of a fire that claimed the lives of several students, their innocent souls forever trapped within the charred remains. Imagine the musty smell of old books and decaying wood, the silence punctuated by the drip of water from a leaky roof. It's here in this forgotten place that a group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night, hoping to communicate with the spirits rumored to roam the halls. The team arrived at the school just as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the overgrown playground. The building loomed before them, its windows dark and lifeless, like the eyes of a predator lying in wait. They unloaded their equipment cameras, EMF readers, and audio recorders, their every sense on high alert. As they stepped inside the school, they were greeted by an oppressive silence, a stark contrast to the joyful noise that must have once filled these halls. They made their way to the auditorium, a grand space that had once hosted school plays and assemblies. Now, rows of dusty chairs sat empty, facing a stage that had fallen into disrepair. It was here, according to legend, that the fire had trapped the students, their escape cut off by the flames. The investigators set up their equipment, their movements efficient and practiced. They placed cameras in each corner of the room, their lenses staring out like watchful eyes. They turned on their audio recorders, hoping to capture any whispers or moans that might break the silence. As darkness enveloped the school, the investigators began their investigation. They called out to the spirits, their voices echoing in the vast emptiness. They asked questions, their words hanging in the air, unanswered. Suddenly, one of the cameras positioned at the back of the auditorium flickered to life. On the screen, they could see a faint mist forming near the stage, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The investigators, their attention now focused on the stage, watched in astonishment as the mist began to take shape. It swirled and coalesced, forming the ghostly figure of a young girl, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. The investigators gasped, their cameras capturing every chilling detail of the apparition. The ghostly girl stood on the stage for a moment, her image flickering in and out of focus, before she vanished into thin air, leaving behind a sense of profound sadness and despair. Emboldened by this encounter, the investigators continued their investigation, their excitement tempered by a healthy dose of fear. They moved through the darkened hallways, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, their senses heightened. In the library, they found books scattered across the floor as if thrown by an unseen hand. The air was thick with the smell of burnt paper, a grim reminder of the fire that had ravaged the school. As they made their way to the classrooms, they began to hear the distinct sound of children's laughter, faint at first, then growing louder with each passing moment. The laughter echoed through the empty corridors, sending chills down their spines. They followed the sound to a classroom at the end of the hall. Inside, they found small desks arranged in neat rows, each one covered in a thick layer of dust. On the chalkboard, written in what appeared to be chalk, were the words, "Help us." The investigators exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. Our final tale of terror takes us to the outskirts of town, to a crumbling mansion perched atop a windswept hill. The house, once a symbol of wealth and prosperity, is now shrouded in an eerie silence, its windows boarded up, its gardens overgrown. Locals speak of the mansion in hushed tones, for it is said to be cursed, its very foundations steeped in tragedy and despair. Imagine a dark and stormy night, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing against the windows. It's here in this desolate and unforgiving place that a lone traveler seeking shelter from the storm stumbled upon the cursed mansion. The traveler, a young man named David, had lost his way while driving through the mountains. With the storm closing in and night fast approaching, he had begun to despair of finding shelter when he spotted the mansion in the distance, its silhouette rising against the stormy sky like a specter. He cautiously approached the house, his car struggling to navigate the overgrown driveway. As he got closer, he could see the extent of the mansion's decay. The walls were crumbling, the roof was missing shingles, and the windows were boarded up, giving the house a sinister, almost skeletal appearance. David parked his car near the front porch and got out, his coat pulled tight against the wind and rain. He approached the front door, which was made of heavy oak and adorned with an ornate knocker shaped like a snarling gargoyle. He hesitated for a moment, a sense of unease washing over him. He had heard stories about this house, whispered tales of madness and death, but he was desperate for shelter, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Taking a deep breath, David raised his hand and knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the empty house, but there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but still there was no response. Deciding that the house must be abandoned, David tried the doorknob. To his surprise, it turned easily in his hand, and the door creaked open, revealing a darkened interior. David stepped inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The air inside the house was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of dust and decay. He could hear the wind whistling through cracks in the walls, and the sound of rain drumming against the boarded-up windows. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out to steady himself against a nearby wall. As he did so, he felt something brush against his fingers, something cold and slimy. He recoiled his hand in disgust and fumbled for his lighter, flicking it to life. The small flame illuminated a cobweb-covered hallway, its wallpaper peeling, its floorboards rotten and creaking. He took a deep breath and ventured further into the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He passed by a grand staircase, its once polished banisters now covered in dust and cobwebs. He peered into darkened rooms, each one empty and decaying, filled with the ghosts of forgotten memories. As he explored the house, he began to feel a sense of unease creeping over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were following his every move. He reached the end of the hallway and found himself facing a set of double doors. The doors were made of dark wood and adorned with carvings of grotesque faces, their expressions twisted in eternal agony. Curiosity got the better of him, and he cautiously pushed the doors open. They swung inward with a low groan, revealing a grand ballroom. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering chandelier, its crystals casting dancing shadows on the walls. If you enjoyed these terrifying tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more spine-tingling stories. We're always on the lookout for new tales of terror, so if you have a creepy experience you'd like to share, please leave a comment below. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.